2 of AFTA Talks, where our minds and hearts meet. Today we have a very special guest. She is my colleague, Miss Jacqueline Thomas. She is a special education and literacy teacher at Manhattan International High School in New York City. We will also have participation from our newest AFTA members here in the US and the Philippines. We have Dr. Aurora Samson Reyna from University of Luzon, Dr. Evelyn Celoria, Maribeth Jane Cabral and Jane Beltran from California, Jovi Barakia from Cebu City, and Anne-Marie Wilson from Baltimore, Maryland. Hi, Jacqueline. Welcome to AFTA Talks. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to have a conversation with you. It's truly interesting for us to know that we have amazing teachers of Filipino descent like you. Care to tell our kababayans about this?
Hi, thank you so much for that brief introduction. Before I begin, I just wanted to say that I wish I could be there live with everyone, but unfortunately my schedule wouldn't allow it. So thank you to Reina and Miss Dara for thinking of me and including me in this really incredible opportunity to speak with other Filipino educators, specifically about a topic I know a little bit about, special education. So yes, my name is Jacqueline Thomas. I am a 9th grade literacy teacher and special education teacher for the whole school here at Manhattan International. I am first generation American. My father was born around Cebu in the Philippines, and my mom was born in Soviet Russia. And I take a lot of pride in being a biracial woman. It's really exciting. I grew up with 2 very different cultures that really inform who I am as a person today. A lot of good food. And it's just really helps me to connect and relate to the international students I work with here, and Ms. Dara.
Being a special education teacher, can you describe how your typical workday goes?
This is an excellent question. I think that all educators right now especially have a very difficult road ahead of us in terms of getting students caught up, making sure students feel taken care of. And to answer the question what a typical day is like, I guess it's hard to say, especially as a special education teacher and as a teacher for 9th graders who are new to America. I think both of that dual role I serve is very linked because there's a lot of creating accommodations, creating lessons that everyone can access, making sure that everyone feels seen and heard and every voice is spoken for. And the way we do special education at our school is a little different than at schools I've done where I've taught special education previously. So here we have it in the role, students are in a set classroom, which means they are pulled out. I can push in if I needed to, but they're pulled out into small groups, and it's like a little bit of extra tutoring help. So to prepare for special education class, I just have to kind of speak to the teachers in advance, try the week before if I can, and say, hey, what assignments are pressing? What's the most important thing the student needs to work on? And in the remote world, I need to make sure that I have access to any important Google Docs, access to Google Classroom from the teacher's end, so that 1, I can see the assignment and the directions and break it down more if needed, and 2, so I can help the student, especially if they aren't able to come in for hybrid learning.
Can you please share a snippet of one of your lessons?
So as I said, I also teach 9th grade literacy, and I use a lot of my special education skills to modify and adapt for our newcomers. So I'm going to share a clip with you of the processes I did this year to make sure students had access to Google Calendar and weekly assignments to build routine. Because I think that is the most important thing for students right now, especially special education students, is where can I find information? Who can I ask for help, and what time do I have to do things? Because once we build that routine in, then we can start to look at, well, why is it difficult to meet this deadline, or why is this assignment not getting done on time? And you can go from there. But the first thing we have to do is really break down, this is school, this is the routine I need to be in, here's how I can be successful independently, because eventually, especially in high school, there won't be an adult there to guide them through 100%.
So for my curriculum share, I guess I'm doing it a little differently, but I'm going to share what my students do to be independent or try to be. That's been a really big challenge in ninth grade, is getting students to do work on their own and follow a routine. So I'm going to show you what I set up so they can do that. The first thing I did was, at least for my classes, I set up a Google Calendar. Students are invited to whatever specific section they're in. Yes, this is my schedule. So they are invited to their class, and that if they need to, find the Zoom link, they open the invitation, and there it is. Pretty easy to find. And I found that's been really helpful for students who at first weren't showing up to classes, and now they can see it really clear. Try to show them how to put their other classes in as well. So we start with that. And then we also have the weekly assignments. So I do synchronous classes, but at the same time I have 3 weekly assignments that are weighing the most this year in terms of a grade, just so students can see weekly progress and feel really confident that they're turning in work that they can do. So those are their comic of the week. They have an assignment called Quill and an assignment called Duolingo. So those are kind of the 2 that they have. So the first is their comic of the week. I'm teaching using graphic novels this year, as I started last year. And so each week I find a fun comic, usually from this place called Cat's Cafe or a different artist called Sunday Kids. And students will read it. They've learned how to identify row, panel, dialogue, things of that sort. And then they have to describe what they see in 5 complete sentences. This is just a skill that a lot of our students I've found are lacking when they come into ninth grade, and so I want them to get used to it. Also because 5 sentences is a complete paragraph, generally speaking, and so if they can do 5 sentences here, it builds the stamina, writing a paragraph a week. And then they also have to summarize in 1 complete sentence to show me they understood the concept, understood the comic, and it's been something we've been working on since September. And kids really like it. They think it's fun. I get a lot of good feedback on the comics I've been picking, so that's nice. And then the second one I have students do is Duolingo. So as you can see, I made my own account, and I obviously haven't done it on this, but students have a goal of 100 points per week, which is roughly 10 to 20 points a day if you do a 5-day week. And so they go through and with their language, their home language, and then learn English basics this way, because we're not really doing a lot of language flooding in ninth grade because of remote learning. And so this way at least they're getting exposed to the basics, numbers, food, just things that you would get in everyday life. Now they kind of get it here. So this is for some of our more emerging students, and then I have Quill for some of our more advanced students. And you can see it's basically a grammar website. It's really wonderful. I can give them different grammar and grammar drills, essentially stuff that I would love to teach in class, but with the schedule this year I can't, and so they have to do it. And basically Johnson does really well, but like pronoun, antecedent, agreement, they have to do an assignment, and then if they get below a certain percentage, they can replay it. And the goal for both Duolingo and Quill is that if you make mistakes, the apps allow you to redo it, and so that gives students this opportunity to demonstrate a growth mindset of like, I didn't get the points this time, how can I keep going? And that's what the grade they get for all of these, for both Duolingo and Quill, is growth mindset. Basically, did I try my best? Did I listen to the feedback, and then did I apply it? Because as we know, students sometimes struggle to apply feedback. And then I want to show you a little bit of the back end data, what I get. So I get to see for their comic of the week, they're practicing using complete sentences. So for example, this student right here didn't write 5 sentences. It's a list, and we're missing a punctuation mark. So this student would need a little more help and guidance expanding their writing. This student is using the same sentence start frames, which is fine, but then I'll know maybe we can work on variety of sentences, and then we'll get students who can do a lot more, like right here. And so it's really nice feedback for me to kind of see how I can push students with their writing. And it's weekly, and it's easy, and it's familiar to them and for me. And then the same thing with the summarizing in a complete sentence. Can we say what we need to say quickly?
Oh, thank you very much, Jacqueline, for sharing with us the essential things that students need, especially during this time of the pandemic. We now have a question from an AFTA member all the way from the West Coast.
Hello, AFTA. My name is Evelyn Soloria. I'm a special education teacher at Compton Unified School District in Los Angeles, California. Here's my question. How has the focus on special education shifted over the years here in the United States and globally?
This is also a really fun question. How has the focus shifted? Well, I think that people are more aware of who is getting recommended for special education, at least in America. I'll start there. So for a long time, a very specific population of people, of young people, were being recommended for special education, specifically Black and brown young boys. And that was becoming a problem because was it really that they needed extra academic support? Or did they need maybe a little more social emotional support, like counseling, or just maybe a little bit of extended time? So I think there has definitely been a shift into being more aware of who we're recommending and why. Because once a student has been given the label of special education and given an IEP, it can be really challenging to get rid of that, right? I try, if a student comes in with an IEP and I didn't write it, I try to get to know the student. Obviously, I read the IEP first to know for any really pressing matters, but I try to get to know the student off of that piece of paper. In the past, general education teachers, through no fault of their own, sometimes you see that IEP and it's like, right, this is the student. This is who they are, and it's going to be a challenge. When really, all you have to go to the management needs and say, oh, this student needs extra time. Most students need extra time. I can do that. Or I have to read these directions out loud, right? But to get an IEP is such a long process that it's even more difficult to remove it. And sometimes that can be really challenging. So I think that's kind of where the mindset has shifted to being just more mindful about who we're recommending in the process. In terms of globally, I would say that more countries are aware that special education is a need, right? It's not a bad thing. It's not saying that the student is a bad student, that these are bad parents, or even that the general education teachers are bad teachers. It's not a negative, right? It's really like a positive reinforcement. It's adding help. It's adding services to make sure that students get what they need. And yeah, so I've noticed that, friends in other countries have said it's still kind of taboo and not always talked about, but I think it's coming out in the open more. Because again, like I said, some people have IEPs and they really don't need them. It was just a miscommunication. But sometimes there are really pressing matters and they should be addressed, right? Because the IEP is a legal document. And so especially for state testing and for other outside services, that IEP can really help a student and family access the world in a different way. But we just want to make sure that the right people are getting this IEP and that it's not being used against the child and student.
Let's now have a member from the other part of the globe. Let's hear it from Jovi Barakia, an educator based in Cebu City.
Hello everyone, Mabuhay AFTA. Here is my question. What are the most common cases or classifications of students with special needs in the United States? I just want to know if these cases are also comparable to what we have here in the Philippines. And maybe this could help me when I will be applying as a SPED teacher in the United States of America.
Great. Thank you for this question. So as I mentioned previously, we want to view the IEP as a way to help a student and not a way to put them in a box or assume negatively. In America, we have 13 classifications that can go on an IEP, and they run a really broad spectrum. So in the past, I worked with students who were on the severe end of the special education spectrum. So things like TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, autism that was really severe to like the point of being potentially nonverbal, or difficulty feeding themselves, clothing themselves, more teaching life skills and things like that. So those students need IEPs so they have access to, job resources, at-home care, nursing, all sorts of different things. So those IEPs are very intense, and those students in New York City go to a special district called District 75 for really to moderate to severe and mostly severe needs, where they're really small classes, very hands-on learning. And if there's ever a chance we wanted to talk more about that type of special education, I'd be happy to do that, because I spent 4 years teaching, in that world, and it is very different than teaching special education here in a community school. So in a community school, typically students have diagnoses of just specific learning disability, sometimes speech and language impediments, and sometimes deaf or hard of hearing. So let's break those down. So specific learning disabilities are things like, dyslexia, dysgraphia, the list goes on and on. And basically those students can function, fine. They're on par with their peers socially. They can talk to teachers. They can advocate for themselves. It's just they need extra supports accessing academics. And so what the IEP for them does is it breaks it down and says, here's where the students are strong, and here's where the students need extra support. And honestly, all good IEPs should say that. Students with speech and language might say, they need, instead of having oral exams or presentations, they may be allowed to record in advance so that they have time to practice and not stutter, if that was a concern for them. And then they'd get a speech and language pathologist to help them. Students who are deaf and hard of hearing, it enables them to have, Braille for a test, sit closer to the board, like mandated. They can't be placed at the back of the room. So things like that. So that's kind of typically what we see in a general education classroom. And the more severe the students' needs are in school, the more severe the classification on the IEP. I just wanted to clarify something. At the end, I said Braille for deaf and hard of hearing. That is not true. Braille would be for someone who was blind or had vision impairment. And they can also be in a community school. They just might need extra supports. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Here are Miss Jane and Miss Mary Beth from the Bay Area of San Francisco.
The pandemic has affected our lives and many lives of people all over the world. To what degree has it affected your role as a specialist?
Oh boy, what a question. I feel like the pandemic has upended my role as a specialist the same way it has upended everyone's role, right? We try really hard to give our students the best of our time and the best of our ability. But, if special education students don't want to turn their cameras on and say, I have no work, and they're fully remote, what can I do? I can force them to turn their camera on, but then I ruin that relationship I've been working so hard for. I can have them share their screen, but now we're on Zoom and everyone sees their potential mistakes or challenges in their homework. I'm not in person to check in and say, hey, you didn't come to class, or, your other teacher told me you're not doing your essay. It's due next Friday. What's up? So I think that while it is very challenging to be a special educator during this time, because I don't have as much, it's much more challenging to build on my personal relationships with students. I think that it's affected me the same way it's affected everyone else, where, I have to choose between time and resources and what students to help. And just as everyone else, I'm doing my best. But sometimes it's really hard because on top of everything else, our special education students are usually the students who need extra guidance, who really should be spending more hours at after-school tutoring, who really should be in person to get that hands-on learning. And we can't give it to them, and that's not, their fault, and that's not my fault. It's just really out of my hands, and I worry, to be completely honest, what that means in the long run. But I do know that I can say this for myself and for all educators, that we've done our best. We will keep doing our best, and I have to remember, what's in my control and what's not.
Hi everyone. As a follow-up question, how do you manage your responsibilities as a special education teacher during remote instruction? Are the resources enough, or is there anything you wish was different?
This is a really good question, because I think that you could ask 4 or 5 different special education teachers, and we'd all have very different answers. So I can speak from my experience, and then I can share a little bit about what I've heard from other schools. I am incredibly lucky to work at a school that has provided me with the resources and the supports I need to do my job to the best of my ability. Because we are hybrid, I do have some students who come in for special education, and I work with them in person, 6 feet apart. And then I have, at the same exact time, students who are on the computer because they chose to be fully remote. And so that can be very challenging for me to divide my time and attention when, 1, they're all in different classes, 2, they all have a variety of needs, and 3, I have to just trust that the work is getting done on the computer when I'm not sitting in front of it, for the students who are remote. So that can be challenging, but my bosses here understand, and the parents understand that, I'm doing my best, students are doing their best, their teachers, their general education teachers understand. So in that regard, I'm very lucky. But I also know that other teachers aren't so lucky. So they might have to find a student's schedule, and the schedule might change, or the teacher might be a fully remote teacher and the students are in the building. So that has been a challenge, I think all around the world, but especially for specialties like special education, is just getting access to the students, one, safely if you're in person, because you're seeing multiple people, and also online, making sure they can connect, making sure, can we have our cameras on? Can you share your screen? If there's multiple students, is that embarrassing? So, really just time and space to work with students is what we need. And I'm grateful that I get that, but I know that it has been hard for other schools and other teachers to schedule that.
Warm greetings to AFTA. This is Aurora Samson Reyna, Vice President for Academics, University of Luzon. And this is the question: what are the major issues confronting the field of special education today, especially during this time of the pandemic?
So how to break down special education and the challenges in a soundbite. Excellent question. I think one of the most challenging things in the pandemic is the legalities of it. So in New York City, at least, when a student has an IEP, at the beginning of the year, I had to write an adaptation for remote learning. So basically, a conversation with the parents and the student acknowledging, hey, you have, accommodations 1, 2, and 3. I can't provide 3 because you're remote, so I'm going to do 1 and 2 and do my best to do 3 in a modified way. And the parents say, yep, we understand that. When we get back to normal or whatever that may be, we'll bring that one back in. So that's kind of been a hard thing, because we need to make sure that, legally students are entitled to whatever services are on that IEP. And so in the pandemic, it's almost sometimes it's just impossible to get that. If a student has 5 hours a week of services, but classes are only 40 minutes, how do you do that math, right? So you go back and do that paperwork, which leads me to one of the biggest challenges with special education is all that paperwork, right? Spending so much time doing paperwork, sometimes I don't feel like I can really work with my students. But I know that it's getting better and things are getting digitized and on the computer, which makes it much faster and definitely much easier. But as I said before, even though it is much better about who we are recommending for special education, I think that one of the biggest problems we have is assuming special education is the magic wand that will fix everything for a student. And while I'd like to think that I have amazing educational powers and I'm an amazing teacher, it's not going to fix what's happening. The IEP does not say, right, great, now the student is going to totally be able to access all their content. There will no longer be behaviors because they're frustrated. They're never going to lash out again. And that's not what it is, right? So I think that we just need to be mindful that special education is, on its surface level, supposed to be there to help a student be successful academically. And then, as a teacher, a lot of that becomes relationship building. So being mindful of, are we requesting an IEP for a student because they are going through a rough time and being really challenging behaviorally in class? Or are we requesting this because we really think they need an extra service to make sure that they're getting extra help outside of, tutoring for these academic needs?
Hello, good day. My name is Anne-Marie Wilson and I am a special educator here in Baltimore City Public School System. And I have a question. Do you think there is still a growing need of special education teacher here in the United States of America?
So I'm often asked this question, by friends or other educators. Do you think it would be helpful if there was, a second person like you in this school or, at previous schools? And I think the answer is yes and no. In terms of a pandemic year, it would really be helpful if I could focus my energies on either my remote students or my hybrid students and not have to, be split between. It'd be helpful potentially in other schools. Again, I have a lot of resources at my school, but other schools, if there was a teacher for a specific grade band, and then that way all students were on the same page and it was much easier. It also depends on the number of students in the school, right? So if there's a large number of special education students, you do need more teachers so that the teacher's not overworked, which leads us back to why are there so many students with IEPs and is it necessary? Because if it is necessary for 20 students in one grade to have an IEP, then it is also necessary to get enough teachers to be able to support them, because that was the issue in the first place, right? On the other hand, I think that we need to take a closer look at RTI in response to intervention, and if more general education teachers had a little bit of training in that, maybe they wouldn't be so quick to request special education until it was absolutely necessary. So RTI, response to intervention, is basically like levels of supports that were in class that got us to special education. So did we provide separate worksheets? Did the student come to tutoring? Did we, sit them closer to the front? Did we give them different options to present their work, right? How much breaking down of the material did we do as in the classroom? And if that still wasn't working and the teacher's done everything, then we bring in that specialist, that special education teacher that says, okay, you have to get pulled out of the general classroom to work in a small group. Because ideally we keep students with their peers as long as possible, so that they can socialize and grow up and not feel ostracized. So I think, yes, we do need them if the numbers in the school call for it. But it would also be helpful if other teachers had a little bit of background training to make sure that a student who has it absolutely needs it, and it's not just a blanket statement for a student that might be particularly challenging this year.
Okay, here's another question. How should special education be viewed and carried on in order to continue to be relevant in the coming years?
I really like this question because I really enjoy thinking about long-term and big picture things. So when it comes to special education and big picture thinking, I think we need to shift our focus away from special education is a crutch, or it's a way to just get the student through the next 4 years or the next 3 years, right? I think we should view it as if a student needed an IEP and every other support was put in place and it wasn't enough, we give them that IEP, we pair them with a special education teacher, and then we say, great, we're here. How do we get them back to being independent and successful and not need that extra support, right? And that's really how I think we should view it. Not as a forever solution, but as a temporary fix to give the student what they need to be successful on their own. Because as a special education teacher, nothing fills me with more joy than a student who, I've taught them a strategy of making a schedule, breaking things down, chunking, highlighting something, and then I see them using it not only in my content class, but in another class, right? That means they are one step closer to not needing me anymore. And while I love to be needed as a teacher, I want all my students to be independent, but especially my special education students, because more often than not, they've had to overcome a lot more or to be put in this situation. And I want them to be able to be okay in the outside world, especially because there won't always be a special education teacher in the outside world, right? There won't always be somebody to double check their work for them. They need to learn to do it on their own. And so, yeah, that's how I think we should view special education, as a bridge back to independence and not a separate space for them to stay for the long term.
Well, that's about it. That was the last question for our special guest, Miss Jacqueline Thomas. Any parting words?
I just want to reiterate again how grateful I am to talk about, special education in the pandemic, outside of the pandemic, and just really get to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. Again, I wish I could be in person to, answer questions and bounce ideas off of, but I'd be happy to answer any questions via email, come back when I have a little bit more of a free schedule, because I think that special education is really important, and I think people take for granted just how much work goes into it, but also I think outside of the teachers, we take for granted what our students have to go through. If it's, they often need a lot more help and a lot more patience, and so being a special education teacher has taught me so much about empathy and just how to, take a step back and realize this is not about me if the student is not understanding. There's something else going on, and, I just have to figure out what it is so I can help them. And yeah, that's really all I have to say is just, we don't want to keep our special education students in boxes forever. We want them to be independent just like we'd want for any other student. So I hope that's something you all take away from this, and that we use special education the way it's supposed to be, not the way we want it to be used. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for your time and for sharing your expertise to the Filipino community. Maraming salamat sa mga viewers ng AFTA Talks, where our minds and hearts meet. Till we meet again, this is Dara Valconcha, your host for today.
I'll be around.